All right. Um, Hello, everyone. I don't think you can see me because Ruslan is the main attraction here. But my name's Christopher, and I'm going to give us a little intro for this presentation. Um, you're all here at the Google Analytics API presentation or webinar that Ruslan has worked on preparing. This is provided by AdSwerve. We at AdSwerve are the leading Google Marketing and Analytics Cloud partner. We're the #1 provider of Google Analytics 360, Campaign Manager 360, and Search Ads 360. This slide just shows a few of our accolades as it pertains to our relationship with Google and our qualifications to provide services under the Google marketing platform and how we are qualified to help our clients reach their marketing goals through the Google systems. This presentation will be provided by Ruslan. If we can go to that next slide. Ruslan is a dear friend of mine. I've been working with him for about 2 years, but he has been about 8 years of experience in data analytics. He is a Google Cloud certified data engineer, which is impressive of itself. That's a difficult certification to achieve. Prior to being a data engineer at AdSwerve, he worked as a data analyst for some government agencies in Canada, and he was also a former teacher. And you'll notice that as through his presentation, that prior experience really speaks for itself in the way he presents and teaches. And we're definitely lucky to learn from Ruslan today. And yeah, I hope you all get something out of this. And I know Ruslan's worked really hard on this. So I'll turn the time over to him. And yeah, take it away, Ruslan.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you for such a kind introduction. Welcome to the webinar. Again, thank you for joining us. This webinar will be recorded, and a recording will be available on the blog, and you will also receive an email with the link to the recording. I'm very excited to talk about GA Data API. We will cover definition and importance, types and versions. We will dive into Data API and Reporting API basics. I will give you some demos and share some challenges that our clients have shared with us when they worked with Data API. Let's jump in. So an API is a way for two systems to communicate, for two systems to exchange information. In practical terms, it means if you are extracting data from some system or loading data, and you're making some authenticated request to some endpoint, chances are you're using an API. GA Data API is a service that allows you to run and automate reports based on GA4 data. It gives you programmatic access to your GA4 data, and there's a similar service for UA called Reporting API. GA Data API can be used to automate complex reporting tasks. So you can get your GA4 data. It won't be raw data, but it'll be aggregate reports, but still very useful. You can integrate your GA4 data with data from other sources, and you can also prepare your GA4 data for custom dashboards. And you can build custom dashboards in your business intelligence tool of choice. One of these tools is Looker Studio. Looker Studio is self-service BI tool, which is very powerful. And so this is a very subtle product placement. I'll be honest, yeah. But Looker Studio is awesome. We encourage you to use it. So why should you care about today's topic? Why is it important? Well, it's important because eventually UA will be deprecated. Actually, very soon UA will be deprecated. And GA4 is replacing UA, Universal Analytics. So eventually you will lose access to your UA data. This is where Reporting API and Data API come in very handy. You can use Reporting API to export your historical UA data. And then moving forward, as we're transitioning to GA4, you can use Data API to query your GA4 data. You can read more about Universal Analytics deprecation on AdSwerve blog. There are some alternatives to GA4 Data API. It's not the only way for you to get your data. You can also just use Google Analytics UI, and you can see your reports there. And if you want raw data, then you can also connect your GA4 property to BigQuery. So you can export your data into BigQuery. And so BigQuery export is a paid feature if you use UA. Only if you use UA, you can only do BigQuery export for UA 360, for GA 360. But for GA4, BigQuery export is free. Today, we'll talk about GA4 Data API, but before we look at it, let's just look at how Data API for GA4 fits into a bigger picture. Let's look at other APIs related to GA. So this is by no means a exhaustive list, but these are the 3 types of APIs we commonly work with. We work with some APIs which extract data, your web traffic, your app data. So we also work with some management APIs which allow you to administer, to manage your UA property, UA view or GA4 property. And we also work with user deletion APIs. So when it comes to reporting, it's about running reports on your GA data. So there is Data API for GA4, and there are alternatives for UA. So for UA, I have worked with Reporting API version 4, and there's also Reporting API version 3, which Google calls Legacy. But let's say you don't need to extract your web traffic data, but you need to run some reports about your, for example, your UA view. Let's say you want to run a report about what filters and what goals you set up in your UA. So for that, you would use Management API. And there's a similar service for GA4 called Admin API. Generally, they're used to manage your properties and views, but you can also run some reports about those views and properties. And User Deletion API is compatible for both UA and GA4. And as the name suggests, it allows you to delete a user. And you may want to do that due to some regulatory, some compliance reasons. And again, today we'll mainly discuss Data API for GA4, but we'll also look at Reporting API version 4 for UA. With that, let's dive into some fundamentals of Data API and Reporting API. And so the following slides will be color-coded. So orange will display Data API for GA4, and blue will be about Reporting API for UA. We will cover the following 7 topics about these APIs: request, response, metrics, dimensions, segments, sampling, and pagination. And bear with me, there'll be a lot of slides, but they will help you write and read code which interacts with these APIs. And understanding these concepts will help you with any API, because any API can have a request and a response. Okay, so in order to get your data, you need to ask for that data. You need to send a request. And this is a request body for Analytics Reporting API for UA. So you make a post request to this endpoint. Notice how the API is called Reporting API, and also the endpoint has a reporting in its name. You can just figure out what API you're dealing with by looking at the endpoint. So we're making a batch GET request to this endpoint. And in our request, we need to supply UA view ID, date ranges, and metrics. Notice that date ranges is an array, so you can supply multiple date ranges, which is very handy. So once again, this is an example of a request to a reporting API for UA. Let's compare it with GA4. This is a sample request for GA4 Data API. So we are making a post request to this endpoint. Notice that the endpoint has the word data, and the API is called Data API. We're making a run report request, and we need to supply our GA4 property ID, our date ranges, our dimensions, and metrics. So we send a request, we get a response back. This is a response body for reporting API for UA. So I just took a screenshot of it. So data comes back as JSON, and in Python it'll be a dictionary, but you don't have to use Python. You can use your programming language of choice. There's multiple clients available. I'll show you these clients later. So your response object contains reports, and each report would have column header, so metric headers, data. It'll have your metrics and dimensions there. And for GA4, again, similar idea. You would have a response object back as JSON, and you would see your dimensions, headers, metric headers, as well as your rows and totals. So this is your response. Later, I'll show you response in more detail during the demo. So there'll be three more things I want to cover during this fundamentals section. So the next one is segments. So as you probably know, a segment just means that you are not querying all data in universal analytics, but you're querying a subset of data. So segments here in this context is only applicable for UA. In GA4 data API, segments are not supported. So, but in UA, you can query a segment using the API. Segments can be, well, for example, you can build a segment such as not all traffic, but only traffic which uses Safari browser, or only Firefox browser, and the country is the US. So, and you can query that segment from, so using your API, reporting API. So segments can be static and dynamic. Static segment means that you built your segment ahead of time in a UA user interface. Then you can figure out what that segment ID is. One way of doing this is you can go to a tool called Query Explorer. And so once you log in with your Google account, which has access to your UA view, you can specify your account and your view, and then you can look up your segments. You can see segment names and segment IDs. So this is how you can figure out, I'll just refresh this, some error. So anyway, you can figure out what your segment ID is by just finding it here. So these are the IDs. Then you can supply that segment ID in your code. And so that's how you can query a static segment. I'll show an example here. We're querying a reporting API for UA. And everything is the same as in one of the previous slides, but we also supply segments, and we indicate our segment ID here. Some clients that we have worked with, they like using what they call on-the-fly segments or dynamic segments in UA reporting API. So, and I apologize if this is too small, but I'll walk you through this. So this is how you can query a dynamic segment in a reporting API. So you say segments, then you say dynamic segment. You give that segment a name, sessions with Safari browser. And then you specify your filters. You say dimension filter is, we're filtering on browser where it equals Safari. So dynamic segment is, you basically build it on the fly as you're calling the reporting API. Now, when it comes to segments in GA4, currently they're not available. So no further comment on this, they're just not available. Now let's talk about sampling. So there'll be two more topics in this section, sampling and pagination. Sampling, again, is only applicable for reporting API for UA, and it just means that you're not running a report based on all data, you're running a report based on a subset of data. You may have encountered sampling even when using a user interface in Universal Analytics. So again, same thing in the reporting API. You can control sampling. If you supply sampling level parameter, you can set it to small, large, its default, So large sampling level means your results will be more accurate, but your response will take longer. So there's a trade-off here. Actually, when people work with reporting API, one of the common challenges is dealing with sampling and working around sampling. So yeah, luckily, oh yeah, by the way, before we talk about GA4, so here's an example from UA. Again, the syntax is the same as before, but we also add sampling level and we specify large. When it comes to GA4, the good news is it builds reports based on unsampled data. So therefore, there is no equivalent of the sampling level field in GA4 reporting API. Sorry, in GA4 data API. So that's good news. You just get a report based on all of your data. But what if you have a lot of data? Your data may not fit into one response. This is where you need to know what pagination is. So you send a request, you get a response back, but your response cannot be infinitely big. There's only so many records that the response can return. And you may have to send subsequent, you may have to send like multiple requests as a sequence to get all of your data back. So to do that, you would need to do pagination, and you need to supply page token and page size when it comes to reporting API. So page size is self-explanatory, just means one response, it has all of your data is on a page. So this is how many observations you can have on the page. And so that's page size, right? Page token is your skipping parameter. So this request on the screen means give me 10,000 rows, but skip the first 10,000 rows. And there are similar parameters for GA4. I'll just show you on an example. So you supply limit and offset parameter. And this request right here says, give me the first 100,000 rows. And this request here says, give me the second 100,000 rows. So the limit parameter in GA4 has the default value of 10K, but you can bump it up to 100K. And so limit, again, it controls how big your response is. And offset means how many observations you would skip. So when we were preparing for this, we put together a table for you. You can use this table as your reference as you're querying GA4 data API or for GA4 or reporting APIs for UA. So these are your pagination parameters. So when you're working with GA4 data API, you use the limit parameter to control the size of your response. So by default, the response can have 10,000 observations. You can bump it up to 100K. And then if your data is still larger than 100K, then you need to use offset parameter to move, to iterate through multiple pages, to send several requests as a sequence. So offset is your skipping parameter. It says skip X many rows. And once again, the example is right here. So give me the first 100K rows, give me the next 100K rows. And if you use with a reporting API, depending whether you use version 3 or version 4, these are their corresponding pagination parameters. These are their default values. These are their max values. And so once again, you send a request. Your data doesn't fit into your response. You bump up your page size parameter, whether it's limit or page size or max results. And then if it's still not enough, then you have to programmatically move through multiple pages by supplying a skipping, I call it a skipping parameter. So I hope this helps. Now we will jump into some demos. Let's just see this all in action right now. Okay, so there's many ways how you can call the GA4 data API. And I will show you 3 ways today. I'll show you Query Explorer. I'll show you Spreadsheet add-on for Universal Analytics for Reporting API. And the coolest way I'll show you today is using a client for your programming language of choice. Okay, let's just go ahead. Let's take a look at this. So our research question is, what are the most viewed web pages on the AdSwerve website? And I can just create this report in the UI. So this is Universal Analytics. I'm showing page views by page title. I'm looking at the last 7 days. And this is a report in GA4. Again, same idea here, but we see views and users by page title. So throughout this demos, this will be the research question. What are the most viewed pages on the AdSwerve website? Let's go ahead and let's make some API calls. So there's a very handy tool, UA Query Explorer. When you use this tool, first of all, you need to log in with your Google account. And that Google account needs to have access to your UA view or GA4 property. So your request will be authenticated. And then you need to supply your account, property, and view. Then you need to specify your start and end date. And then my dimensions will be page title, and my metrics are page views. And you probably know that dimensions are groups that you use, so some string variable that you use to group your numbers by. And the metrics is self-explanatory. These are your numbers. So I will sort the results by page views, descending. See, it does minus here for descending order. Now let me run the query. Now all of these things that I showed you on the slides, you see them here in action. So this is your request, and this is your response. Well, the response is JSON, but it's returned. It's displayed as a table. So let me see if I can maybe change the sorting order here. Okay. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but basically I just want to sort this in a descending order. So, oh yeah, okay, let me sort by page views in a descending order, and I run the query. Okay, so this is your results. Let's see if these numbers match what I see in the UI. Okay, yes, they match. 1150, 1150. I always tell people, my mom is an accountant, so I really like numbers for that reason. And I really like when numbers match. They don't always match, obviously, in web analytics, but sometimes they do. So just like my mom, I like when numbers add up. So, so this is the power of the API you see here, right? So you don't need to manually generate your reports, but you can automate your reports using the API. A reporting API for UA or data API for GA4. And first you prototype your request using Query Explorer. So that's the first step. And then let's take a look at GA4. The ideas are all very similar here. So again, you are logged in with a Google account, and that Google account has access to GA4 property. So you specify your account, your property. This property is our own testing property. We have some coworkers who like pizza and pizza emoji. So yeah, you see it here. Again, we specify our date range and our metrics and dimensions. I noticed that GA4 Query Explorer does not work unless I also specify a sorting order. So I'll sort by page views. Now let's see if it works. Okay, so this is your request and this is your response. I will quickly check if the numbers match. Yes, the numbers match, 1264 and 1264 here. Well, the response comes back as JSON, as we mentioned earlier. And you see this JSON structure that I showed you on the slides a few minutes ago. you have your dimension headers, metric headers, you have your rows, you have your row count here. For your convenience, Query Explorer can display the data as a table. Okay, and this is our, so this was our request, right, as JSON, and this is our response as JSON. Okay, you can use Query Explorer to play around with different requests, to prototype your requests, to see if they're even possible. And if you, now let's say you want to take this one step further, you want to automate your reports. For UA, for reporting API, there is a really handy tool that you can use called Spreadsheet Add-on. And it's a very convenient tool. Again, you can use it to prototype your requests or even to automate some simple reports. To get started, you just need to, again, you need to log in with your Google account. You need to, that the Google account needs to have access to your UA view. And then you need to go to extensions. You need to install Google Analytics extension, Spreadsheet Add-on. And then you go create new report. And then you say what your account, property, and view is. So this is just the name of my own testing website, and this website, that word is the name of my parents' cat. So she used to have her own website. So this is my own test account with my own test website dedicated to my parents' cat. This is AdSwerve account. So you give your account, property, and view, and then you specify metrics, dimensions, and then you say click create. You click create report. After you do that, the extension, the add-on will give you a report configuration. Now, a really cool thing is you can create subsequent reports if you just copy this configuration and you make some changes to your end dates and start dates, metrics and dimensions. You also need to make sure you call it something else, so there's no reports with the same name. And you can have multiple reports and you can run all of them in one go. So, and again, the research question is the same as before. What are the most viewed web pages? To run this, I will go to extensions, Google Analytics, and then run reports. There'll be a dialog box. The dialog box will tell you if anything failed. So this is your report. You see, this is the timestamp of right now. We just ran this report based on this GA view. These are our totals. So this is very handy if you're doing some prototyping, you're automating some reports, you can check that your totals match what you would expect. And this is your report. You can also automate reports if you go to extensions, GA, schedule reports. And you can schedule all of the reports in this spreadsheet. You can give them all the same schedule. They will all run on the same schedule. Now, if you want different schedules for different reports, you can do it as long as you have separate spreadsheets for these reports. So this is Spreadsheet Add-on, a really cool tool, not available yet for GA4, but for UA, if you're extracting your UA data, feel free to use this tool. Let's say you outgrew Spreadsheet Add-on and you want to do something bigger, something more powerful, something more scalable, something even more automated and something more highly customized. For that, you can use a client for your programming language of choice. So for reporting API, these are the available clients, Java, Python, JavaScript, PHP. And for data API for GA4, you can use Java, Python, Node.js, PHP, .NET, and Go. You can make a request to reporting API or data API using these clients. And again, as usual, your requests need to be authenticated, and you would need to perform a few steps to prepare, to do some configuration, to do the authentication. So the examples that I'll show you right now, they are available on the AdSwerve GitHub webpage. We encourage you to go to AdSwerve GitHub. we shared a repository with you. In that repository, we have some quick start snippets. They will get you started with UA and GA4. And we also, so I said where I took the code from. So if you want more examples, you can follow these links, look at more examples to use in your application. When it comes to setup, these links describe what setup steps you do, how you authenticate, how to basically get it up and running. So the following steps you don't need to remember because they are available here in this documentation. But just so you know, these are the steps. You need to go to your Google Cloud Platform project and enable a reporting API or data API. So the steps are fairly similar for the two types for both UA and GA4. So then you go to Identity and Access Management in Google Cloud Platform and you create a service account. So a service account is just like an email address for a robot. So you create your service account. So your requests will be running on behalf of that service account. You click on the service account, you create a key. You will download the key as a JSON file. Treat that JSON file very carefully because it's a powerful credential. If you open that JSON file, here is its structure. You see it says service account, and it specifies your GCP project ID. This is your private key, which I obviously blurred. This is your client email. So the email that corresponds to that service account. You also see it's the same email address as from here. Then you go to, if you're using UA, you go to admin and you grant that service account viewer access to your UA view. And for GA4, it's all the same. So the only difference is here you would enable GA data API for GA4. And so at this stage, you do the same thing. You just give access to your GA4 property. And so now you're ready to start running your requests. Now you're ready to start automating your reports. I'll show you a couple of examples here. So this is an example for UA. Let me first run it and I'll walk you through what it does there. So, but before I do that, okay, so see it's printing the numbers. Again, I will check to make sure if the numbers are matching or not here. Oh yes, sorry, this is a UA. I'll go back to this in a second. That was a UA quick start, but I just wanted to start with UA. So UA quick start. Let me first run it. Okay, 1150, 1150. I'm just checking to make sure the numbers match. Okay, so this is a quick start for Universal Analytics for reporting API. So what we do here is, well, that JSON file, the credential file that I mentioned before, for the purposes of this quick start, I just put it in a local subdirectory. So it's inside a sandbox subdirectory. And well, to make sure I don't accidentally commit that credential file to the GitHub repo, we made sure to git ignore everything in that subdirectory. Okay, so now we have a credential file stored locally, but if you're doing this in production, let's say if you're using GCP, for example, or another cloud provider, you can do this differently. On GCP, I would store this credential in a secret manager, in the secret manager. So secret manager on GCP, it's like password manager for your applications. And if you're using AWS or Azure, they probably have something similar. And I would just programmatically grab credential from the secret manager. So then it's not stored as a file. But right now I'm storing it as a file here just to keep things simple. Okay, so what do we do here? We create credentials with our JSON file. From our JSON file, we build analytics service object, analytics reporting API version 4. And then our research question is again, most viewed pages. So we run a batch get request. We supply view ID for UA. We specify our date ranges, our metrics and dimensions. And then optionally, we can indicate order by. You can hard code your date range, or you can give your dynamic date range, 7 days ago to yesterday. And yes, so that's about it. There's more examples in this UA part of the demo, but you get the idea here. One really cool example is you can also parse your data into a pandas data frame. So yeah, so if you keep running this, it will parse your UA data into pandas data frame. But I'll show you that example on GA4. Let's just move on to GA4. So there's a similar example there. Okay, speaking of data frame, right? This is what I mentioned. Let me first run this, and I will show you how it does things. Okay, so that is it should be our GA4. Again, I will check if the numbers match, 1264, 1264. So again, we are supplying local path to our credential file. And again, that service account has access to GA4 property. And then we create a client, which is beta analytics data client for GA4. We send our request. In our request, we supply property ID, page title, and our metrics and our date ranges. And we send a run report request. And then this function right here parses JSON response into a data frame, into a pandas data frame. Let's take a look at the variables here. This is your response. I apologize if it's too small, but yeah, it's your response. Your data is JSON. And because it's hard to work with, it may be hard to work with JSON data, we parse this into pandas data frame. So for those of you who like pandas, here you go. You can now continue doing work, anything you can think of. Now, there are more examples in this repository. So, and I won't spend too much time on this because they are a little bit repetitive, but nevertheless, just to give you an idea. You know how in UI you have your real-time reports. You can also query your real-time report for GA4 if you send run real-time report request. So if I run this, this is your real-time report. Some additional examples in this repository that we shared on our GitHub contain some other use cases, such as you can filter your, so basically you can filter your request by some metric or by some dimension. And you can even, you can query multiple date ranges. And so yeah, there's some more examples there. So we're pretty much nearing the end of the presentation. I'll just share with you some challenges that clients reported, and we'll do some conclusion here, and we'll go into your questions. So 3 challenges I personally have heard from clients who work with reporting API or data API for GA4. So it's challenging to migrate from a reporting API for UA to data API for GA4. Another challenge is managing quotas and limits. And one more challenge is getting around sampling and reporting API. So we do get a lot of questions about migrating in general from UA to GA4 and with regards to APIs specifically, with regards to reporting API. Also, I built a report in a reporting API. How do I rebuild it in a GA4 data API? So 2 things here for you. Please refer to the migration guide. This is very useful. It walks you through some caveats that you need to know when you are migrating. We also get a lot of questions, oh, I have a field in UA, where is that similar field for GA4? So there's a very handy page here about equivalent metrics and dimensions. You may find an equivalent, you may not find an equivalent because GA4 is a different system. You may also just need to accept that some things cannot be rebuilt directly. We encourage you to find a workaround or change the way you think about some metric or a dimension. And another challenge, quickly, I personally experienced this challenge. In this example that I showed you, when we create a data frame, remember that data frame stores, Pandas data frame stores data in memory. So if you deploy this to the cloud, such as Cloud Function on GCP or Lambda in AWS, remember you may run out of memory. So be careful of that. It may not scale very well. So that's a challenge that I have personally experienced. In conclusion, Data API and Reporting API provide programmatic access to your UA and GA4 data. Data APIs for GA4. We covered the main concepts today, including request, response, metrics, and dimensions. I showed you how you can query the API in different ways, including Query Explorer or Spreadsheet add-on, or a client for your programming language of choice. And challenges you may face include migrating from Reporting API to Data API. AdSwerve is there to help you with these challenges. If you have any questions, please reach out. We hope that you found this webinar useful. We wish you all the best in your analytics journey, and thank you very much. And now with that, we can go into your now we can go into your questions. So I think what we're going to do now, we have a couple of dedicated people here who are responding to the questions. Yeah. Oh yes, so one small thing here. My coworker just pointed out, so I'll just point this out. So this library that we referenced in our code is deprecated, but it still shows up in Google documentation, which is fine. So we would use this library instead. Yeah, so this is deprecated. We would use this one instead. Oh, actually, so I think it makes sense because I was wondering why I was getting some warnings. It still worked, but there were some warnings. Okay, so one question we received right now. What if instead of extracting data from GA4, we need to send some data to GA4? What tool would we use for it? So that's a good question, thank you. So there's a couple of tools you can use. We do have some notes on this. We commonly work with these tools. The first tool you can use is GA4 measurement protocol, and it's essentially an API. And that API allows it to send data to GA4. And AdSwerve maintains a Python library, which is a wrapper on top of the API. And feel free to check this blog post called How to Use the GA4 Measurement Protocol Python client, and also check our GitHub. Our Python library is there. So using that library, you can send requests. You can send data to GA4. So another tool you can use to send data to GA4 is called, it has a long name, it's called GMP and Google Ads Connector, but it's also called Tentacles. And Tentacles can send data through to a variety of endpoints, including GA4. So to send data, you can use GA4 measurement protocol. Well, I mean, they both use GA4 measurement protocol, but you can use add sort of GA4 measurement protocol Python library, or you can use tentacles. Yeah, so another question we just got was about the user deletion API. Let's take a look at that one here. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to look something up here. So when we were discussing types of APIs, one of them is user deletion API. I'm not super experienced with user deletion API, but I did work with it to delete some records, some users from UA. So I'm not like super familiar with endpoints. Let's take a look here. Somebody asked me, can you talk about endpoints? Okay, so it looks like this is the endpoint, Google APIs, analytics, user deletion. And again, it's compatible with both UA and GA4. I have worked with user deletion API for UA. It was good to delete maybe one user or maybe like a few hundred users. If you are looking to delete millions of users, I was having issues. It was very, very, very difficult to do so. But check documentation, and also there are some tutorials. There are some tutorials on YouTube that show you how to use user deletion API with a spreadsheet. So somebody implemented it with Google Spreadsheets, Google Sheets. You can specify all of your IDs or client IDs, and then you can call the API to delete. Yeah, so some of the challenges I had when working with the user deletion API, like I said, it was very hard to delete a lot of users. We were also running into quota issues pretty quickly. But it's good to delete just a few hundred users due to some regulatory requirements. So yeah, I hope I answered your question about user deletion API. So yeah. Okay, so this is a request for user deletion API. Okay. Oh yeah, so in our request, we need to provide user ID. Yeah. Okay, so another question which has got, can we use segment in GA4 API calls? So that is a good question. It came up with a client that we were helping a couple of months ago. Yeah, so segments are not even supported in GA4. Again, in UA, you can query a static, a dynamic segment, and yeah, so segments are not currently supported in data and API in GA4. So yeah, let me just quickly fact check myself because sometimes things change quickly. Yeah, so still not supported. Segments are not currently supported in data API in GA4. So if you're using segments, you're rebuilding them, you're trying to rebuild your report in GA4, you have to come up with some workaround. Yeah. Another question that we got, there was a client that we were assisting 2 or 3 months ago. So we had a client that asked us, is there a way to avoid sampling? So they had some reports running using a reporting API for UA. They were being sampled and the client was struggling to work around sampling. So there's no way, unfortunately, to completely avoid sampling, but there are a few ways you can manage it. So first of all, you can change sampling level. So you can change sampling level. It may work. You can specify higher precision, but it doesn't really turn off sampling. You'll still have sampling. So there are some options for GA360 users. I think the best option is to export your data into BigQuery. You use BigQuery export. You will get raw data. Every row would be a session, and there will be no sampling. So that's one way you can do it. There are some other options for GA360. Now, to be very honest, I'm not very familiar with these options. I just know that they're available. I've never worked with them personally, but there are unsampled reports for GA360. Consider building a custom table in GA360. And again, I'll be honest, I'm not very familiar with this. I just know that this is possible. Also, look at your request. Maybe decrease your date range. Does that change sampling? Also, consider the difference between default and ad hoc reporting. So read this page about data sampling. So specifically, is it possible to change your request? Can you change what dimensions you're querying? Maybe that will affect sampling. Another question we got, and it commonly comes up with clients, so I'm sending some requests and I'm running into API, data API and reporting API quota limits. Okay, so consider throttling, spacing your requests over time. So my mentor, Gord, who is on the call right now, he is good at that. So consider throttling, spacing your requests over time. Also, you may request a quota increase. Yeah, so, and I think that's about it. There was something else when we were preparing for this. When we were researching this for a client, we saw something else. Let me just quickly look this up for you. Okay, I'm just looking at this page here, quotas. I remember there was something here, something useful here too. Just please give me a second. Oh yeah, so something useful here. With each API request, you can specify return property quota true, and it will return current property quota status. So, which will give you amount consumed by the request and the amount remaining for this quota. So that's very handy. You can measure how close you are to exceeding your request. Okay, and so something else we wanted to show you. There were some questions about additional GA4 and BigQuery resources. There were some questions about additional GA4 and BigQuery resources here. Just one second here. I'll just refresh this. These are additional resources available on the AdServe website, including webinars, blogs, guides, and instructions and documentation. And so they are about GA4 BigQuery. Yeah, so there's a webinar. I actually watched the webinar, found it very useful. GA4, getting started with BigQuery and GA4. Then there's also BigQuery export, a quick overview. There's also a blog post about how consent mode affects the way GA4 records data, both GA4 and Universal Analytics. And there's also a very useful blog post on Nest your BigQuery GA4 data with an open source AdServe tool. So yeah, again, we encourage you to check our GitHub page, check our AdServe blog. There's a lot of useful information there. Okay, well, I think no other questions came in. I think we can wrap this up here. Again, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining in, and feel free to reach out to AdServe if you have any questions. We're there to help you. All the best, and again, all the best in your analytics journey. Have fun. Have a great day. Thank you.